I am the only man living who understands human nature. God has put me in charge of this branch office. When I retire, there will be no one to take my place. I shall keep on doing my duty, for when I get over on the other side, I shall use my influence to have the human race drowned again, and this time drowned good. No emissions, no arc. Mark Twain. To everyone who works in customer service, has worked in customer service, or is going to work in customer service in any business, anywhere in the world, fuck customers! This, along with many less eloquently worded thoughts, was at the forefront of my mind as I sized up the situation below me. They were coming for me. Thousands of the dirty bastards. So many that they formed a single seething, churning wave of pallid flesh that hung off of every ill-proportioned body. And despite my superior physical condition and armaments, the odds were not in my favor. My ammunition had run dry, my mana pool was nearly exhausted, and I was the last man standing. My comrades had fallen to the unwashed legions, having fought bravely down to a man. Okay, that was a lie. Truth be told, my comrades were all complete idiots, and I hated their stinking guts. But hey, even if they didn't know how to operate within their chosen classes, or handle themselves under fire, or fight, or even interact with each other in a fashion that would betray the presence of cerebral activity, at least they made great meat shields. Had I a few more of them, perhaps I wouldn't be stuck in this miserable situation. I cursed their ineptitude as I discarded the last of their battered bodies from the side of my infernal dragon mount, my free hand hurling down yet another bolt of smiting, for all the good it did. I was facing a foe whose numbers, like cockroaches, would never be diminished by any amount of stamping. Sure enough, the hole my spell left in the wall of the undead filled in a matter of moments as they continued to close the space below, their grubby hands hurling missiles of rubbish, the battlefield, and even their own rotting flesh up at me as if I were some politician on a stage. The enemy had been very clever to use the dregs of society as zombie material. Instead of expending their resources on a small force of able ghouls, they could bombard their foes with an endless onslaught of the infirm, the out of shape, and the dispossessed. And despite all the precautions I had taken, all the magical trinkets I had outfitted myself with, and how economically I had sacrificed my compatriots to extend my own lifespan, the rebellion was going poorly. The dragon dipped lower towards the crowd, its strength, like mine, waning after hours of endless combat. I spurred him into releasing a gout of flame, this one noticeably less magnificent than the great fiery pillars he had been sweeping the battlefield with up till now. We were both nearly spent, and soon we would have to enter ground combat, at which point neither the great beast's armored hide, nor my own similarly fiery safety vest, which I now understand didn't actually provide any sort of armor or defensive enchantments, but merely made its wearer an easier target, exactly the kind of bullshit safety management would provide, would hold out for long against the merciless assault of the putrid customer base. But we had to hold out. We had to endure. Otherwise, our fighting, our sacrifices, our very lives would be rendered meaningless. I braced myself for the melee to come and cried out to the dogs of war at our heels, "Let us reacquaint these wretches with death!" I drew my last remaining daikatana and urged my saurian steed forward that I might gouge out the heart of the enemy legion, and was caught completely off guard as the beast instead bucked me right off its back. I plummeted into the crowd, and only through quick thinking and sheer survival instinct was I able to lay down a ring of fire beneath me before I hit the ground, the impact knocking my blade loose from my grasp, where it skidded outside the defensive flames and disappeared beneath the tramping feet of my adversaries. With but scant moments to spare before my spell evaporated, I turned to my former mount and bellowed the beast's name, a name known only to he who has braved the volcano's flames and proved himself worthy of harnessing the Eidolon's powers. "Nidhogger!" He turned to regard me with a baneful eye. Having already tamed the great beast, however, I was not to be so easily intimidated. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" He responded, not by speaking, but with pure flow of information, his words pulsating into my mind from his own. To my consternation, his message came not in the burning tone of a guardian beast befitting his stature, but in the non-committal voice of one who is calling in a sick day just for the hell of it. "Meh, I've had enough for today. Think I'll take an early one. Leave the rest of these buggers to you." What? I mean, you've been going on about how you need more hours. I figured this should be plenty enough to get you to stop complaining. Catch you later, mate. And with those words, he turned, stretched out his massive wings, and with strength that I realized he had been short-selling me on for the past hour or so, sped off into the horizon. Just like that. With the exodus of my last ally, my odds for survival had, in an instant, gone from poor to exceptionally poor. Shit! In the seconds that remained of my defensive flames, I swore that, in the unlikely event of my survival, I would never again rely on the services of a Western dragon. Now, those Oriental dragons, on the other hand, they know what loyalty and dedication really mean. I readied myself. The ring faded, and the customer zombies charged. Ducking beneath an overhead swing, I aimed a roundhouse kick at a particularly corpulent specimen, noxious gases bursting forth from its overstretched carcass as my foot collided with the stinking mass, fumes that would have overwhelmed me had I not learned long ago to hold my breath in the proximity of the unwashed masses. The fat fuck tumbled backwards, sending an entire column of its brothers and sisters behind it sprawling to the ground. Seizing my chance, I sprung through the gap in the cordon, and spying a hill some distance away, promptly hauled ass towards it. If I could just get a good vantage point, I might be able to find the source of the undead horde, and bring an end to this madness. As I ran, both of my hands flashed through the somatic motions of different spells, my last remaining shield charge forming a shimmering coat of light around me, while a flurry of ice knives struck down the undead ahead of me. I reflected on how, when the other war mages in the group had attempted similar feats of multitasking, the results had ranged from pathetic to suicidal, which had played a large part in my decision to protect myself with their bodies instead of their magic. Pounding toward the hill, I was nearly shaken from my feet by the thundering steps of a massive decrepit titan lumbering into view, 50 feet tall, hundreds of years old, and possessing not one shred of the knowledge and wisdom a being of its advanced age is implied to have, The creaking hulk planted itself square in my path to salvation, a distant, vacant look in its cataract-filled eyes. I cursed my ill fortune. Fighting the giant would be a waste of time and energy, for the creature possessed only a dim awareness of the world around it, to the point that even ramming a sphere of flaying right up its ass was no guarantee of catching its attention, and the customers were blocking all means around it. Taking a chance, I shot between the Titan's legs, dodging the clutter of assorted crap that filled the beast's numerous pockets, junk that, of course, never would have come loose had I not been attempting to pass the old fool at that exact moment in time. Reflecting that, around here, seniority only counts for senility, I left behind the being that should have been consigned to a retirement castle many moons ago, whooping with delight as the edge of the hill came into view. Evidently sensing my intent, the foul legions pulled from their ranks an especially cancerous individual, every inch of exposed skin teeming with virulent pustules, and ruthlessly tore into the damned creature, its death wail spewing forth a large puddle of vile ichor directly between me and the hill. I grinned. My contemporaries would have opted for mundane, time-consuming methods of clearing this obstacle, but I, as usual, had come prepared. I snatched the vial of spill powder from my pocket, uncorked it, and with a flourish, spread it in an arc in front of me, the white stuff almost immediately going to work absorbing and nullifying the poisonous pool that impeded my path. The magical substance was supposedly in short supply, but I knew that the jackasses who worked in the back rooms had been hoarding a stash, along with other supplies sparse up front, so I had taken the liberty of nicking a case for myself prior to the campaign. Fat lot of good this stuff did those filthy idiots, seeing as how they never once cleaned or organized that pandemonium of a storeroom they were in charge of. I paused ever so briefly to catch my breath, and that's when I heard the unmistakable shrill cries. I turned, bracing myself for the awful sight that I knew was speeding toward me like a stagnant nightmare. Oh, shit biscuits. Children! There were maybe half a dozen of them, all shrieking and flailing about gormlessly as their kind do incessantly, piled into a cart that they had somehow convinced their handlers to bring to the battlefield, with the largest of their number pushing it along at a rapid clip. Their banshee screams were like talons raking the inside of my head, and I knew that in the remaining seconds it would take for the toxic spill to recede enough to permit my crossing, they would be upon me. I had to act fast. Resisting the urge to jam my boot knives into my ears, I freed the electronic cart unlocker from the front of my apron of slavery, the shackle that only victory or death could free me from. Most people never think about using that second button on the unlocker. Then again, most people aren't me. With a single press, the front wheel on the cart of doom screeched to a halt. The sudden stop drove the demon child in the rear forward, colliding at eye level with the handle. The forward force of the vehicle, with nowhere to go, flipped the whole deal forward, ass over tea kettle, spilling out the little monsters it contained, their stubby limbs lashing out in all directions like rag dolls as they landed in a tangled heap. Ha ha! I chortled as I scrambled up the ascent to a top so level it was as if it had been prepared just for my arrival. Knowing that I had only moments to spare before the driveling monstrosities below clambered up to my position, I scanned the surroundings, cursing my circumstances. until I espied amongst the billowing sea of moldy gray bodies a single point of pure midnight black. There! The sound of clawed hands scraping the ledge around me broke my concentration. The bastards had nearly reached me, clambering over one another in droves. Uncaring as to the members of their own ranks, they sent tumbling down to the rocks below. With my mana so low, I didn't know how I was going to make it to the zombie boss from here. I glanced about frantically, when my gaze lighted upon a single tiny sapling at the edge of the hill, the sole spot of green in this endless wasteland. "Mother Nature," I muttered, "you haven't abandoned me." I snatched the tiny life from its precipice, uttering an apology to it before invoking the spirits of the earth, if any would still listen, to grant me the power to vanquish the devils who befouled her glory. I finished the cantrip, and I leapt from the ledge, the sapling's life energy burning into a sword of pure emerald flame in my hand, and plunged into the meaty throng. 1, 2, 1, 2, and through, the Viridisaber went slash, and slice, and stab, and other awesome combat-related sound effects. One after another, the undead fell, their ragged bodies bursting into flame at the touch of the earth-given energy, or collapsing into dust by its force. With renewed vigor, I charged through the horde, swatting down like flies any who dared approach. As I cleaved through a row of moldering bag ladies, their sacks of waste scattering as they fell, at last my true foe came into focus. This was it. The one responsible for the damned legions. The monster who had put me and the others through hell on earth. The Arch-Lich. The Supervisor. Its tattered robes hung over a skeletal form, devoid of the uniform it kept us bound by, a symbolic gesture of pointless tyranny befitting such an abomination. An odd, uneven bulge projected from one side of its body beneath the rags, no doubt a symptom of the heinous mutations it had been subjecting itself to since before living humans could recollect. The flesh had long ago eroded from its face, leaving only a sneering skull, cackling words of venomous hate through a perpetual rictus grin. Even jaded as I was, I couldn't help but to shudder at the sight of it. This was a creature that had long ago willingly traded its humanity for power, blind power, the power to oppress and enslave, to put the lives of working men like me in the palm of its withered hand and wring them dry. I would have to fight to my last breath to destroy it, or else it would nail my corpse to a cross as a sign to all others who may dare to oppose its reign of terror. With a cry to the gods of battle, I surged toward the Lich, hoping to strike it down before it could conjure up some black magic. As if reading my thoughts, which may well have been the case, the fiend pointed a single bony finger, and the damned moved in exact accordance to its will. In seconds I was surrounded, a fresh cadaver sprouting up in place of every one I struck down, grubby hands raking me from all directions. As I struggled to disentangle myself from the customer mass, the supervisor raised the sign of its dark office, the dreaded clipboard of vainglorious might. Uttering a hollow cantrip from where a throat once presided, the hellspawn ran its withered hand over the words of power, fell runes materializing over the thin grimoire, before incandescent tendrils wrought from pure, impotent rage erupted from beneath the ground, lashing and tearing at me even as I swung the Viridisaber in defense. It being a supervisor, I was, by the ancient and arbitrary and stupid laws that bound this corporate land, incapable of defending myself in return. My battered body couldn't hold out against the onslaught much longer. I had to end this quickly. As I forced the last of the unwashed from my person, I took aim and uttered an entreaty to the gods.
Earth, sea, and the four winds heap upon thine cursed soul their blame. Return now, foul one, to the dust from whence thee came.
Admittedly not the greatest of invocations, but fuck you, I was at the end of my rope. The words spoken, I hurled the Viridisaber like a javelin towards my undead nemesis. As it flew, the emerald sword transformed, becoming a lance of golden light wrought in the likeness of the spear of destiny itself. It plunged through the center of the arch-lich, its rotten flesh wilting before exploding in a burst of scarlet flame. The vile clipboard clattered to the ground, and all activity on the battlefield screeched to a halt. I did it! It was over! Elated, I laughed out in triumph. A laugh which died in my throat as the supervisor's robes burned away, revealing the identity of the mysterious bulge. It was a child, better washed, but every bit as hideous as the ones I had dealt with before. In every feature, it was like a miniature version of the person the Lich Lord had been in humanity, less like a real flesh-and-blood child, and more of a homunculus of its sire. The fiend had brought its kid to the battlefield! What the fuck? I cried, taken aback by such an underhanded tactic. I began cycling through the handsides to summon a bolt of smiting, but alas, the clone child was quicker, the shock of its sudden appearance giving it the time it needed to snatch up the fallen clipboard. As it raised the foul tome above its head, a disembodied time clock materialized from the void, accelerating the eldritch growth of the child. I could only watch as the freed spiritual residue of my deceased foe rose from the ash, using its own offspring as a simulacrum. Flesh rotted and fell away to reveal bleached bones, until at last it was a spitting likeness of the fallen supervisor. Nay, it was the supervisor reborn! I launched the spell I'd been preparing, only for the reincarnated demon to swat the bolt away as if it were nothing more than a paper airplane. I began the somatic components for an orb of burning death, but before I could get even halfway through, the Neo-Supervisor turned the lingering time clock to face me. As the fiend ruthlessly manipulated my hours, the air around me suddenly felt like molasses, and my hand signs slowed to a glacial pace. The foul caster was, of course, unaffected by the time manipulation, for supervisors never take heed of the schedule, despite the fact that they themselves create it. Even as I cursed the Lich for its refusal to fight me like a man, I could see the end approaching. The unwashed masses swarmed over me in a tidal wave, their filthy limbs entangling me as if I were caught in some vast spider web. My world darkened, and the ground beneath me gave way under the weight of the horde pressing itself down on me. I plunged headlong into the abyss, and landed face first on the floor of my bedroom, my sheets tangled about me, my body trailing behind, driving me into the carpet with a dull thud and an expletive. I gazed about blearily, struggling to free myself from my bedding before at last taking in the nuclear green letters of my alarm clock. 5:15 a.m. Shit. I grumbled and swore, groping about the clutter of my nightstand blindly for some form of painkiller. I still had 2.5 hours before my shift started, but no way in hell was I going to be able to get any more rest. Not after that. There, in my small, cluttered room, at the very ass crack of dawn, I mused on how this was neither the first nor likely to be the last royally fucked up vision to torment me in my quiet hours, as I found my life increasingly turning into a Videodrome-esque waking nightmare. Gonna be another long-ass day.